Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar organized by Tides Business Incubator, IIT Roorkee. My name is Manish Singhal and today we'll be discussing on the topic negotiating term sheets. And to talk about it, we have with us Mr. Jasmeet Singh. Hello Jasmeet sir, welcome from all of us.
Yeah, very good morning to everyone.
So Tides IIT Roorkee is a recognized business incubator supported by Department of Science and Technology, Ministry of Electronics and IT, Department of Biotechnology, BIRAC, and various other agencies. We run various programs for the development of entrepreneurship ecosystem in the country. We run programs such as incubation program for 2 years for early stage startups. We run acceleration programs ranging from 3 to 4 months. We also organize various events and boot camps in institutions in the region. We also run startup programs in partnership with government agencies such as Engineers India Limited, and Tides is also a nodal agency for Uttarakhand government for processing startup applications. So before I let Jasmeet sir to just take over the session, I'll introduce him. Mr. Jasmeet Singh is the CEO and director of ProBuds Strategy Consulting Private Limited. He's a chartered accountant with over 15 years of experience, with expertise in deal making, compliance management, startup management, process management, business outsourcing management, and strategy consulting. Welcome, Jasmeet sir. So I would now request you to take over the session.
Yeah, thanks Manish, and thanks Tides for giving me this opportunity to be part of the series. This is my third talk with the IITians or to be IITians under this entrepreneurship series. Earlier, we had discussed regarding incorporating the companies, the country formations, nuances with regard to that. And today, we are going to learn some nuances about the term sheets, negotiating term sheets. It's a wide topic because term sheets that you understand is just a document. But what goes into the document is something that we are going to discuss today. So, without taking much of time, so I'll just move ahead and let's set context with what we're going to do. As we all know, some of you would have started their startups, some of you would be thinking of starting their startups, and some of you will, in those few years, would get into this practice. So, all you need to remember is that startup is not a small thing. Company growth of company, taking company forward is not a small thing. It takes time to build up. Growth doesn't come very, so you have to have that maturity to have it grow in the time that it requires. During this time, during this journey, you will encompass certain challenges and opportunities. So you have to just take this right on and move forward. So when we start a journey from the startups, there are certain milestones that you come across. So when we talk about the term sheet is not something that you start up with. Term sheet comes much later. So along the journey of your startups, there are a couple of milestones that you have to first go through, and then you come to a place where you have to learn about the term sheet and where it's needed actually. So the first milestone that you kind of accomplish is when startup is founded. You need startup, you need a company before you get to a negotiation table, get an investor come in. So the startup should it is something that is in the form of an LLP, in the form of a company. Most of you might know this, and most of you, if you want to know this, start a company is founded by at least 2 shareholders and has to have 2 directors at least. The initial capital can be from your own pockets or incubator like Tides, many other institutions like them do help invite companies and give us certain capital to start and go with. The next milestone you come across is when you need the time to need the funding. So few times it's not the immediate that you need the funding. There is a time period when you have to undertake, when you have to know when that funding is needed. This could be the time you have started your startup, you start up a company with an idea. When that idea grows to be a product, a service, or whatever you have, the goal is to undertake, a time will come when it will require to grow. When the idea needs to grow, the product needs to grow. And that is the time when you will need money. When the large sum money will be needed to have your employees on board, when you have to have your technicians on board, you have to have a larger infrastructure on board, and that is the time you think about funding. And this is where the next milestone comes. You go and search for investors. There are times when some investors may come to you, but That's not something that happens very, very early. So it is for your job to go and find for investors, go and join, and ways and means of doing it. The conferences these days, these workshops are organized by various investor groups. So that is time when you have to go and showcase your products, your POCs, proof of concepts, what you have, and that is when the process of matchmaking begins. The matchmaking here means that you don't go to just one investor. There will be many investors that you will be going to. There will be certain investors who will just not even hear you. There will certain investors who will hear you but not call you. So this process keeps on going. There will be investors who will come to you but may not be interested later on. But this whole process of matchmaking, you have to see that who is interested in your product and taking this journey forward. Then the rounds of negotiation happen. So once the matchmaking process is over, you have kind of know that this investor is trusted and this will take our thing forward. So the negotiation round begins, and then the investment finally gets a thumbs up. So still, no discussion of the term sheets, no discussion about when the money is going to come, when the investor is going to put in the money. But once he gets a thumbs up, when he gives a thumbs up, he gives a go ahead that, okay, I am ready to invest in your company, and this is the stage when the term sheet comes in and kicks in. We move forward the term sheet, and I will be discussing the term sheet in the few slides ahead. Then the formal agreement process begins with the DD, the due diligence process being in progress. Then you have to satisfy the conditions precedent that have been put into the term sheet. We'll be learning more about these in a while. And that is the time when at last the money tranche goes in and walk home with money back. Standing term sheet, very briefly, it's a written document. It's not compulsory, but it's good to have. So in 99.9 cases, you will find that term sheet is part of the negotiation that you will have to undergo. There is no set format for this. It could be in a bullet format. It could be in a detailed other formats or an agreement format. So the format doesn't matter at all. What matters is the terms and the conditions that have been put under that. It's a non-binding document, and it also gets mentioned in the document that this is not a non-binding document, and we'll be talking about this, what it actually means not binding. It's something that is to do with that when we have negotiated the terms, under what circumstances, what situations, what are the conditions under which the investor is going to put in the money. So as I was saying, that this document doesn't need to be in a very detailed format. It could be in a bullet format. So don't be surprised if some investor comes and gives you a 2-page term sheet and says that this is the term sheet. So the basic premise is that the conditions under which the investment is to come in, and the negotiation that you have done, negotiation in terms of various aspects that we will be learning in a very brief from now. Now that whatever was discussed across the table, so that gets minuted in the term sheet. So term sheet becomes the first document that any founder signs with the investor, apart from exchanging various emails where they would have discussed various aspects about their investment. But this term sheet is something that gets noted down, that under each and every point of from the investor perspective and from the founder perspective gets noted down, so that the possibility of any misunderstanding is percolated, and you don't go and come forth with the points that this was not discussed, this is something that we don't remember that we discussed this. So the possibility of having those kind of misunderstandings is given away. The term sheet doesn't mean that if it's been signed once, it can't be signed again. The modifications are possible in term sheets. That's the reason why somehow seems to be a draft kind of an agreement which keeps on evolving as and when the situation comes. And this also serves as a preparatory document for the binding agreement that follows after the agreement gets signed and the conditions get satisfied. Now, the need for the term sheet. Now, why would you need a term sheet if the negotiation table, you got the thumbs up, your investor said that, okay, we are going to go ahead with the investment and will invest in your company. So why can't the question might come in your mind that why can't the agreement be the first document to sign? Now, there are pretty good reasons why it begins with the term sheet. Now, at the time when the negotiations are happening across the table, you might not know the real investor. because there could be people who would have scouted you for an investment and as a portfolio, and they are the one who go and talk to the investor that this company is good to invest in and we should make an investment. But at that time, you might not know who the real investor could be. The term sheet becomes the first point where you might come to know that which is the actual real investor, which company is the real investor. As we have already discussed, that this document eliminates the possibility of misunderstanding. So all the discussions that you have had gets noted down under this document, and anything that was not discussed can be amended, can be modified, and before the signing happens. This document serves the good document to have that understanding cleared. As I already said, the modifications are possible once the binding document and agreement gets signed. That's very hard to get modified, but this is a document wherever you feel or the investor feels that the conditions are not being conducive, so he or you can make his modifications accordingly. So multiple drafts can come out of this term sheet. Now, because the terms have been fixed, the things that you have contracted to, agreed to, so it reduces the time taking to draft the investment agreement, because the same points also get drafted into the main agreement, but with more and more details. This would give you a very overview of what has been agreed for or what will be the course of future fundings. It also saves expensive legal costs, because once, as I said, it's not a kind of a binding agreement, so there is no point that you might need a lawyer to draft this agreement or a document, because it's just a simple piece of paper where the understanding gets listed. So you tend to save a lot of legal costs because the lawyers are not involved in making a legal document here. The due diligence doesn't start at the time till the time this gets signed. So there are a lot of procedures and processes that are avoided before the term sheet is signed. Had you signed the agreement first, then there are a lot of things that you have to do first, the DD, the legal cost, and everything. And later on, if after the DD report comes and says that this company is not safe to invest in, or whatever the conditions that the non-compliances they come out with, at that point of time, it will be very, very difficult to call it off. This also provides you the freedom to walk out of the deal anytime when the conditions are not being conducive. At the start of the deal, at the start of the negotiation, at the start of even drafting the terms or term sheet, there are not many things that can come out of the closet later on. Maybe you've got something that, okay, take an example of POC. So your POC actually gave a good result at the time of negotiating, but later on, while you were evolving it, your POC doesn't prove the results that were promised to the investor. So the investor has the choice not to invest now. So at that point of time, without creating any disharmony, this can be called off, and it's not going to be like you will not be get invested. So he may say that you may need more time, come back to us again when you have done this. There will be times when you don't have a proper documentation at the time when you created your company. So later on, when the investor comes to know about it, he can terminate the deal at the time of term sheet only, so that the real procedure was not followed, the agreement was not signed, because that is a time when the things can get muddy. So for these many reasons, having a term sheet is good to have. Now, talking about the critical aspects, what gets mentioned in the term sheet, these are the very broad aspects, the 4 areas which get covered in the term sheet. There's a deal economics, and we'll learn about what we are talking about here. So what size of the investment is, what kind of shares you are going to be getting issuing to the investor, what kind of capitalization table, what kind of the share that the investor has asked for. So all that gets covered under deal economics. The investors and rights protection is a very, very critical aspect in the term sheet. This is where the investors talk about their protection, that how their investment is going to get protected. Management and control is again an important aspect where the investors will bind you with certain conditions that how they are going to control the company, whether you will have the complete independent control of the company or whether they are going to have their way around. And then the most important, exit conditions. Without an exit condition being there, nobody makes an investment. So exit condition is something that where you actually need to bargain a lot, and this is where the investors make the most of it, and you will learn about it very soon. And when negotiating term sheets, the real challenge that comes is because the investors have invested in so many companies, they exactly know where to put forward, and you being the novice, you being the dealing with these investors for the first time, may fall for it, maybe for any conditions, maybe for any clauses, maybe for the money that you see coming in. So before you get to sign the term sheet, let's learn about you what common keywords that are used in the term sheet that you need to be aware about. We'll start with the deal economics. So the common word that you will definitely hear about is the investment round. At what kind of investment round that we are dealing with? So the investment round is nothing but a total deal size, the kind of investment the investor is going to make into the company. And this will be based on the valuation of the promoter company. So that becomes the base, and the basis valuation will also be fixed. This specifies that how much money the per investor will be investing. We come to a term called valuation. So this is the most common word that we hear about for the startups, and I think it's not the daily that we hear, it's every hour that we hear that such and such company has been valued so many billions, so many millions, unicorns. So this valuation is something that you are definitely going to be worried or be knowing a great deal about. The valuation is not just the company's worth that is drawn out of the calculations that an accountant would do, or a merchant banker would do. What you need to care about is the valuation of that is the money that is coming is a pre-money valuation or a post-money valuation. Now these two terms, when they are used, so it's very, like you can see that the value of the company before raising an investment is called a pre-money valuation. So if your company is valued as at $1 million or 1 million rupee, then a person definitely is going to ask that, is this valuation a pre-money valuation before the investor came in, or is this the money after the investment came in? The post-money valuation is something that you will see that how it changes the whole aspect, the whole side of it. So if your company was valued at 10 million, the founder, if you see the first scenario, the pre-money, so if your 10 million was a pre-money valuation, so your stakeholding is almost 2/3, so 66.67%, and the investor comes with an investment of 5 million. So the total investment or the total valuation now being the investment being 15 million, but the same 10 million, if it's regarded as a post-money valuation, then see how it changes the whole scenario, where the investor's investment remains at 5 million, but your investment will be regarded, or your money will be regarded as 5 million. So the changes happen is that your stake now comes to 50%. So this is the most important aspect when the valuation is done. When anybody seeks your valuation, you need to be aware about, or if any investor comes and says that I have valued your money, valued your company, so you need to be asking the question, has this valuation a pre-money valuation or a post-money valuation? And lot changes if you don't have this distinction made. Capitalization table, also known as cap table. Now this is a matrix which shows the stakeholding of a company. So whenever, like I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, that when you have your startup started, it starts with two shareholders. It starts with at least two shareholders. Now, how much these shareholders will be holding, how much will be their capitalization within themselves, is something that you agree about between two shareholders, between you and between the founders, and how much they have infused in the company. That is where the cap table story begins. As you move forward, you come to terms with your employees, where you will know that who your employee is, who your best technician is, who your person, the technical terms can take your company forward. So the word that you might come across is the ESOPs. So many companies then give stock options, ESOPs, and these ESOPs are given to those employees who are regarded
as a jewel in the crown sort of a scenario, the jewels who will be helping the company to take forward. So you give out these, when you give out the ESOPs, that also adds up to the cap table, the overall cap table. Now, why this cap table is important is because this is the matrix that the investor is very much interested to, because he will know, because tomorrow he will become the part of the cap table, and he wants to know at what stage he is coming in. So if you see the example, so pre-money cap table for the fresh, we are taking example of Series A shares, and we'll just talk about what Series A shares means. So if you see pre-money cap table, this is when the investor has not come in, and the promoter quota is at 2.6 million. ESOPs granted are 1,20,000 shares. At that point, there are certain ESOPs, and where the ESOPs are pending to be given. So that's a total overall ESOP pool being 4 lakh shares. Now, when the investor comes in and he says that I want to come and invest in your company, so change in the stakeholding, see how it happens, because at the time when the investment is happening, the investment can also happen where the investor can say that you also invest. So if I am bringing in the money equivalent to 750 shares, you also kind of the founders should also invest in as a fresh shares. So Series A is a kind of a category of, so you make a group of the shares which can be regarded as Series A shares. Means anybody, when you talk in the future Series A, it will mean that the shares that were issued at the time of an investment or in the first investment. So it becomes a grouping. So there is nothing more to these shares. It's just the group gets created, the post-money group, so that it can be distinguished later on. So you see, if when the founders bring in the money, so 2,50,000 shares gets issued to them, and 7,50,000 shares get issued to the investor. So the stake changes, but the change comes from the pre-money stake within. So the shift of 15% or shift of 1% or 2% from the ESOP pools gets added to the investor. So your investment or the addition of 1 million shares changes the scenario in this way. So the cap table gives you a scenario, gives a investor a scenario that in a full dilution kind of a scenario, where will or how much stake will I be holding? That's where it becomes important. It holds importance. Then we have conversion options. Now, conversion options is the kind of shares that are preferred by investors. So whenever an investor comes in, he doesn't directly get into the equity mode. He doesn't get directly into a common stock that a company holds. So he gets into by way of preferred shares, the preference shares, which definitely have many conditions, which can come under condition. Certain conditions that which we'll be talking about in terms of how these kind of shares behave at the time of liquidation, at the time of any further deal happening, any further investment happening. So this is the time when the negotiation happens. The kind of shares and the conditions that are put in to have these shares converted is something to talk to the investor, and the investor will definitely be insisting on certain favorable conditions at this point of time. What those favorable conditions to him and what these can be unfavorable to you, we'll just talk about in a while. So what how the scenario changes when the talk of negotiation happening, and they say that we want either an optional conversion or a mandatory conversion. The difference between an optional conversion and mandatory conversion can be understood from an example which I'm going to quote you. Let's assume an investment of 1 crore is happening. An investor got a 2x liquidation preference that translated into 25% of the stock holding. Now, what this 2x means, that whatever investment he makes, he is going to get, at the time of liquidation, he is going to get a double of it, 2x of what he gets invested. So at the situation where the company gets sold for 10 crores, remember the investment from the investor happened at 1 crore. So the investor has the right to receive 2 crores due to his preferred stock holding, because that is the condition that he came in with. Now, in the next, you will know that the difference between the optional conversion and the mandatory conversion. The optional conversion, where he has optional conversion rights of getting the shares translated into the equity holding. There, apart from what he got at 2 crores, he will also get the 25% of the remaining proceeds. So he gets additional 2 crores as well. So this term optional conversion, at what terms and optional conversion, at what conditions he is going to come in, at what those conditions are going to do with your stock at the time of liquidation, at the time of when this conditions get set in, is very, very, very important to understand. And these are very clearly stated in the term sheet as well. So you need to be very much aware about that, what kind of conversion options have been agreed upon. Option pool, while back we were just talking about what the option pool means. It's a very key negotiation point from the investors' perspective, because they are particularly interested in pool size merely because of how a company is planning to retain its talent. That is most important for them. Usually the pool that is decided is between 10 to 15%. That's the usual pool size. Not seen any pool going beyond that, but the companies who do it eventually later on. The pool size, and this is something that you need to understand very clearly, the pool size gets shared by the founders and not by the investors. And to know what I mean here is, you'll just go through an example here. An investor asked to build a 10% pool. So when there was no pool offered, and time when he made the money, and when he made the investment, the investor made the investment. If you see on the left, the founder's shares were about 10 million, and 5 million is something that he invested for. But there was no ESOP pool. The moment an ESOP pool comes in, the economics changes. The share comes out of the founder pocket, because the investor is not going to change his stake. Even if they didn't have the pool size before when the investment came in, and this could be a condition precedent in the term sheet that before the agreement is signed, there will be an option pool that is created. Now, this could be one of the conditions. All you need to remember is whether to have it before or whether to have it after. It comes out of your pocket. The other term that we come and not hear much, but definitely if it's there, or you understand that certain portion of this clause is there, then this is what we call as a devastating clause. Now, what we mean by a participation preference is that this is something that we just a while back we also did an example of it, where the investor invested 1 million with a 2x preferred liquidation stock, and at the time of liquidation, at the time of sale, he made a preference and what option he wants to get into. So those sort of participation preference, what participation preference he has come out, he has agreed to, is something that can have a dipping effect on the company. Here, the double dipping effect is nothing but where we take an example, 1 crore preference shares and 4 crores equity capital. This is the cap table that if you can visualize. So it's giving a 20% preferred to 80% equity shareholding. The company gets sold off. The participating preferred shares gets the first 1 crore. And due to this clause, participation clause being there, the investor has the right to participate in the proceeds which are left after the preferred stock has been paid out. So that will get distributed with the capital structure of what he had invested, so 20 to 80. So he will have that right to get additional 1.8 shares as well. So even earlier, the example we did was an optional conversion or versus mandatory conversion. And this participation clause being there means that this will have to be mandatorily will be done at the time of liquidation. So the liquidation clause need to be understood quite minutely. When it comes to the investors' rights and protections, the first thing and the most common that we hear about is the anti-dilution rights. Anti-dilution rights is a clause that is a protection for the investor, as the heading even says that these are investors' rights. So this is particularly to do with how an investor can protect its investment. So what it merely means is that when any dilution needs to happen in future, and whether it's due to a new round of investment happening, or a sale happening, acquisition happening, a bankruptcy, it could be anything. So how a dilution happens is that where the present stock, the promoter stock, gets diluted. the dilution shouldn't affect the investor. That is where he needs a protection on. So how he gets protected under this clause is where he puts a condition either under full ratchet, which is a one directional approach of by the investor, or a weighted average. A weighted average is a more balanced approach and which is the most widely used approach in the term sheets. Full ratchet would mean where the company offers a new shares at the lower price, and subsequently the investor's older shares will also have to be repriced, requoted with the lower price. So giving an example here, if an investor came in with the 1 million shares at a 10 rupee each share, at a later stage when the company decides to dilute its stake at a 9 rupee per share, then the investor will get under the full ratchet clause, will get its stock already existing stock of 1 lakh shares priced at 10 rupee will be repriced for 9, under which the number of shares will now be 1,11,111 shares. So that's the kind of stake or the kind of additional shares that he will have to be issued with. So mostly or commonly this clause is not used, but once you understand that what it means, so you can prevent this clause coming into your term sheets, into your agreements. What gets amicably used is the weighted average, where it's suited to both investors and founders. And the formula of deriving this dilution is mentioned in the agreement itself. It's a long drawn formula, so it's already mentioned. Another terms that we come across is the preemptive and the pro rata rights. Now, this clause gives the investor to maintain what they already hold, so that their share is not diluted. So if an investment of 3 million was there, 4 million was made by the investor by having 1 million shares invested in, thereby giving him a stake of 33%. Later on, when the next round of investment happens or any dilution happens, he will make sure that his share of 33% is intact. No matter even if you give it to the other investors or any other, so he will. But for doing that, the clauses that get undertaken, what is known as ROFR or ROFO, as we call it, where an investor should have the first right of refusal or first right to offer, that whatever the founders have kind of agreed to, that we are going to have this new investment, he should be the first one to be approached. Till the time he doesn't decline for the new investment, the offer has to first be made to this investor. There is a time period, and he can't hold on to the investment for long. So there is a time period until which he has to decide. So whether he wants to have that investment carried on or he wants to refuse that offer, that's up to him. But the bypass can't happen without him being asked for. Co-sale clause also comes under this rights, these clauses, where, and usually particularly to the minority shareholder, this is useful, where he's allowed to sell his proportionate share at the time when at the same transaction terms that the majority shareholders have agreed upon, so that he doesn't feel left out. Otherwise, because the majority shareholders are the ones who have the advantage of going into the market, getting a good price, and getting out of transaction, getting out of the investment. But what about the minority shareholders? Because they can't be left to be going and scouting for their investment, that how should we kind of exit. So the co-sale clause prevents these kind of investors to not get left behind, and they can also tag along with the majority shareholders with the same kind of business transactions, even if they were not part of it. The other important clause that we come across is no shop clause, and this is a very common terminology, a very common clause, where this clause prevents the company to scout for new investors at the time when the investment deal is being signed or is being negotiated upon. And at this time, because the investors have put in their money, they put in their time and effort, invest in this company to know all what is needed to be with this company. So the investors do not want you to be taking your or their term sheet, whatever valuation was agreed upon, to the other investors, showing them that this much we have got, and now if you can give us more, so we'll go with you. To avoid that kind of a situation, the no shop clause is mentioned in the term sheet, and the Good thing is that it's a time period. It's a time bound. So the term sheet has to get completed. The deal has to get completed in a certain period of time. Till the time that is not done, then you are free to go and scout for the new investor. Till the time it's not done, so this clause prevents you to be approached by any other investor or you going to the another investor. The last one in this investor rights and protection aspect is the conditions precedent. This is one of the very important ones because this is a kind of a deal breaker, kind of a clause where when a person or at the time of matchmaking only, when you got your terms being negotiated, when you agreed upon certain things at the time when this term sheet is now being grouped and kind of being made formal, there will be many conditions that the investor will put in that till the time these conditions are not met, these conditions are not satisfied, we will not be able to take this deal to the conclusive, to the final conclusion. There will be many points that will be critical that before the deal gets signed or the first tranche comes in, the first investment comes in, the first installment of the investment comes in, the conditions that have been put in has to be satisfied. Now, what these conditions could be? The conditions could be regard to any documentation. The conditions could be that an IP was kind of in the name of the founders and in their individual names. A condition precedent could be that till the time the IP is not transferred to the company name, we will not make the first investment. In the documentation, there were certain documentation that were not made available to the investor for their initial due diligence and their initial checking. So the condition precedent could keep this point that till the time this document is not made available to us, it could be a registration certificate, it could be for like pharma companies, it could be the approval. So till this approval doesn't come in, we will not give you the first tranche. So those kind of condition precedents could be a deal breaker if you're not able to satisfy them. So this have to be taken very, very seriously, all those conditions, and these can be negotiated also. So there will be certain condition precedents that can be negotiated to be shifted to a timeline where other tranches have to come in, because for any startup, the first or the second, the next tranche is the most important to take the things forward. So this is where you can have these negotiations come in, that you promise to do satisfy these conditions, but if these conditions can be delayed for a certain period of time, so you can have these things negotiated. Management and control, under this, the most important, one of the most important things comes are the voting rights. Now voting rights are nothing but a participatory rights to the stock that has been issued to the investor. So since the investor is not coming with a common or the equity stock, the equity stock inherently has the voting rights, but the preferred stock may or may not have the voting rights. Now those are the conditions. Under what conditions it may have or may not have are based on the kind of investment is being made. We talked about Series A. You must have heard the Series A stock, Series B, Series C, Series A1. All these are groups. These are categories. There's nothing legal about. So there's not legal terminology. It's all an investment technology terminology, where we categorize these stocks into that maybe a Series A stock has the voting rights, or maybe may have certain more voting rights. Series B stock may have half the voting rights. So this is how you categorize. So a term gets used that whenever a term Series C is being used, the first thing that comes to mind is that this Series C stock doesn't have voting rights. This is how it gets distinguished, and the shares are categorized in that way. And this is how Series A, Series B, Series C. Now these stocks, these categories may have differential voting rights as well. So at the time of the term sheet being negotiated, this will be negotiated very hard, and normally the preferred stock holders do get voting rights and an equal rights, so that they are part of the approval process of the company's decisions, and many critical decisions cannot be taken without the preferred stockholders giving their assent. So this is the reason why this is negotiated hard for the voting rights, and the investors do not take a no for this. Board composition. Now this is one of the most critical aspects of the term sheets or the investment being made, because this is where the voting rights are used for the many critical business decisions being taken from the stakeholder point of view, from the shareholders point of view. But the board composition, many of you understand the board of directors. The directors are the one who run the business, day-to-day business of the company. They don't, for the taking a decision, they don't go to the shareholders for every time for taking a decision. The shareholders have given them powers to take decisions of certain values, certain conditions, because and for which the board of directors are made responsible collectively for any decision. Either it goes wrong or goes right. So there's a collective responsibility we take. Now, how it becomes important for the term sheet is when the investor comes in. Now, investor would like to nominate a director from his side, because he would want that when you're taking a day-to-day decision of the company, because I've invested in this company, I want to be involved in making this decision. So a term sheet may dictate how many directors can can come from the investor side, how many board meetings can happen. As the law says that a minimum 4 board meetings have to happen from the Companies Act point of view. But the investor can dictate more. It cannot dictate less, but it can dictate more than what Companies Act requires. So it may say that for every 15 days we have to have a meeting. It may say that for certain kind of business decisions, a board meeting has to happen. So he can lay down those conditions for which the board meetings have to happen. So the specific business decisions will be drawn up. This will be available in the term sheet. What kind of business decisions will be taken by this collective board? There will also be a scenario where investor doesn't appoint his a director, but a board observer, who are technically not directors, but they are like eyes and ears to the investors, that what happens in that meeting that happened. A board observer goes and gives his minute of meetings to the investor and says that this is what it took, how the decision was taken, this is what was discussed. So technically they're not being a director in the company, but they are the board observers, and they have to be present in the board meetings whenever they take place. Now, a scenario when comes in the composition of the board, a very interesting scenario comes in where a director, because founders, like minimum 2 directors are required from the founders side, minimum 2 shareholders, like I said, when the company was formed, so that minimum 2 directors remain from the founders side, and investor side 1 director comes. So the ratio that you see, as if you see it from the majority point of view, so right now the founders have the edge. So 2:1 is the ratio. So founders majority is more. But the moment a scenario comes where a term is negotiated that an investor is going to have the equal number of directors what the founders have, and plus there will be an independent director. Now the scenario changes drastically, because even now it seems like there is a 50-50 composition from a founder and investor. So it may seem so, but the tricky part is the independent director, because independent director is the one who is neither related to founders nor related to investor. Now he could have his own say, and he could be the game changer. So at the time when you're negotiating your term sheets, the board composition is a tough one to fight for. That when is the time when you need to have independent directors, or how many board nominees are required from the investor side point of view. Because I can tell you that it can get frustrating at the time when the decisions don't go as per your goalpost, as per the direction that you were taking, and the investors have all the say, because they are the one who are looking at from a very other aspect. Information rights, a very common clause in the term sheets, where the investors do need the control over the information. This information could be the financial position, could be giving the monthly dashboards, the MIS, the quarterly financial position to the actual investor, the banking details, fund utilization details being the most critical ones, because investor would like to know on a month-to-month basis where was his fund invested, in which accounts, in which areas were that invested in. So each and every detail of the investment has to be tracked on. Even the things like budgetary information, market conditions, the customers, the feedbacks, the investor could have a control over the information to any extent, even at the cost of your recruitment. So who can get recruited, who can not get recruited, if the recruitment is happening, what kind of person or kind of experience. So the directors, the rights of the directors could reach out to any level. Founders vesting rights is again very common and a very critical clause in the term sheet. If not found in term sheet, then definitely in the agreement, but definitely it will be in the term sheet as well. Now this prevents the investors being sitting alone. In the scenario could be the startup is not working well, the founders have lost their steam, and now the investors do not want to be left in lurch. So they put in this clause that how can founders get away? Now founders can get away by in one way only, that the shares that they hold, they can go and sell it to the third party. Now there are many clauses that will prevent the investors to sell the shares to any third party without investors being having know the details about it. So this vesting rights, founders vesting rights, prevent the founders to have that sort of stock available with them. So the clause, what clause says is that it's kind of a lock-in. So whatever investment at the time when the investment was made in, whatever stock the founders were holding on, the investors put a lock over that stock, and then they kind of put in a clause, could be a staggering clause, or it could be a clause that at the time of exit that it will get open, where it allows the founders to open up a certain amount of shares to get sold. So if a founder at the time of investment had half million shares each, two founders, and at the time of investment, the lock-in of 4 years came in, or the 5 years came in, but with a staggering condition that after every 2 years or maybe a year on an anniversary basis, we will open up only 20% of the stock for you to get sold, or you to get to get free for sale. So at that time, till the time that that lock-in doesn't get completed, the investors will not be allowed to have those stocks sold out. So after a year, they will be allowed only to the level of 1 lakh to get sold to the third party. So this is how the vesting right clause gives the investors a protection that they will not be left in lurch, or founders can do a backdoor deal and walk away and leave the company midway. Coming to the most important aspects of the term sheet, the exit conditions. Now, exit conditions are the one that prevent the investor for their downside risk. Now, the downside risk could be that the period of the startup is not doing well, and there is a liquidation that happens in the startup, there's a bankruptcy that gets filed, or at the time, even at the time when it gets sold out. So there are conditions that the investors put in, that whether our investment is saved or not in these conditions. So what usually you will see in the term sheet is the term known as 1x. 1x means that whenever this liquidation is happening and all, so their investment, one time their investment is to be provided to them at first. So now here, taking an example where the investment of 1 crore came in, and the investor had 2x liquidation preference, and additionally invested 25% in equity. So he had actually two investments, two types of investments, one in the preferred stock with the 2x limitation, and 25% directly into the equity. Now in this scenario, when the company gets sold, the investor has the right to first receive 2 crores because the multiple, the 2x multiple of his investment. And then additionally, as an equity holder, he is also has a right to get 25% of the remaining sale proceeds, whatever gets left out after paying to the preferred stockholder. So this is one of the most important aspects in the exit condition that you have to look for, that what is the liquidation preference that the investor has stored for himself and what you are agreeing to. And usually 1x is something that is a very common practice that everybody agrees to. Drag along and tag along rights, something to do with the prevention for the shareholders. And drag along is the protection that the minority, particularly the minority stakeholders, get in a scenario where a decision that has been taken by the majority shareholders to sell off the company to an ex party, and the minority shareholders have not been consulted, and they were not required to get consulted because there was a majority with the shareholders. Now, this with this clause, and this is a very common clause in every term sheet, drag along and tag along rights. It's just have to be seen at how it's been worded and how the protection goes to the investor. And minority stakeholder can hold that decision based on this clause, that what actions can be rescinded, what actions can get cannot get actioned because of this drag along rights, which the minority stakeholders have. At the same time, the tag along rights give them an advantage that whatever decision the majority shareholders take for their own favorable conditions, because they have the advantage of going to the biggest of the investors for the future rounds or for the their investment getting exited. So the minority shareholders, because of this tag along rights, can take advantage of whatever decision the majority shareholders take. So they say, "Hum bhi aapke saath chalte hain." We can also get tagged along. Now, one of the last important things under the exit conditions, the redemption rights. Now, the redemption rights again come out as a very devastating clause, because this is where, and this is, you will find it mentioned in the term sheets or in the agreements as well, where an investor will want that in case when I do the investment, for how long should I keep this investment? So usually the investment is kept for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So that kind of a time scale is seen. And under that exit conditions, when an investor puts the onus on the founder that you have to get an investor for us to get an exit, a reasonable exit. And if the founder is not able to get that kind of a lucrative option or an investment where they can get out of the investment. So because of these redemption rights, the company, the founders are forced to take or buy back these shares at whatever price, at whatever redemption price that gets fixed. This is why it serves as a ticking bomb for the founders, because by the time that time period comes, when these have to be actioned, and this is the reason, one of the reasons why the founders or the startups are in hurry to get the investments pushed, or get the IPO pushed, or get more and more investment, so that the amount doesn't need to be then is paid to the investors as per this clause. So this is the reason why this becomes a very lucrative offer for the investor. Otherwise, the company refinances its own by introducing an own capital into the company and paying them to get this clause, exit clause, activated. Now, in the future and the further slides, I'll show you the sample term sheet, how it looks like, and whatever we have discussed in the past slides. Now, where and all in the term sheets you will find those clauses. So I have put in together a sample term sheet, which of course was available on our website, and a very common one that is used in India. So as you can see, this is not a bulleted one. This is a very common standard term sheet where you find the details of the promoters, the section with the details of promoters, details of investors who will be investing in the company. Then the point being, on the deal size, what is the investment round that has been, and you can clearly see that it mentions at what pre-money valuation and the total investment, and what was the pre-money valuation of the company, so that you know what is going to be the deal size. The fourth point does mention about the pre-money valuation of the company, whatever crores it is. Then the use of the proceeds. So how the proceeds will be used and all, that is something that gets figured out in the business plan. So the business deck that you are required to make at the time of when the negotiation happens, and due to which, when you impress the investor that as per this business desk, how the business is going to grow and how their investment is going to grow. So that is how you list down the activities where the money will go, agreed upon that way. Then the kind of securities are being issued, like we mentioned. So the terms of shares, the investor shares, so the preferred option also get mentioned, whether it has a dividend option or doesn't have an option. This sample sheet had a dividend option of payment ratio of 1.001% payable in cash. The priority payment being the preference shares, which will have the priority over the equity shares, the common shares as it's known. The present cap table, it's mentioned the post money cap table in a fully diluted form, how the ownership will look like for the investor. So that is also get mentioned. The ESOP pool also is mentioned in the term sheet, that under what conditions. If it was not there, if the investor wants to increase that pool, it will also get mentioned here. So those conditions you will find it mentioned. At what time period this deal is going to get closed? So there's an estimated time. It's mentioned like 60 days here. So this is something that can get extended in a written if both parties agree to. If certain things are delaying in getting this deal closed, so this can get extended. So everything happens in written. You'll find the limiting clause, like an example that is mentioned here, like lock-in clause. Right? In a while we were discussing about this, where the promoters agree not to sell, transfer, encumber their shares in the company until the investors get an exit. The promoter's shares will vest over the period of 4 years with 6.2. So this is the kind of an example of the clause that gets the investor a protection, that the founders will not sell their shares and just leave them in lurch. Then the fact about the intellectual property, that if at the time the negotiation got agreed to, the IP was in the name of the founders. Now this could be one of the condition precedent that till the time this intellectual property is not transferred to the company name, the deal will not go through. So there will be a condition that will be put in, that before closing this investment, the intellectual property has to be transferred in the company's name. Similarly, the liquidation preference, they get listed out quite, not very extensively, because the extensive and very detailed one will come in the shareholders agreement, which will follow after this. But here, if you see, the first para itself mentions the investors with the 1x participation rights. So here it's clearly mentioned, it's a very common kind of a clause that the investor will get an advantage of, that whatever money they have invested, it's sure that they will get the at least the amount that they have invested after the liquidation happens. And there are other the exit routes that get mentioned, that at the time of IPO what happens, at the time of strategic sales what happens. So everything gets mentioned in the term sheet. Then definitely the mentioned about the anti-dilution clauses that get agreed, they will be part of this term sheet. The exit route explained in the time of IPO, the buyback, the drag along rights that get mentioned. Then the conditions precedent, like we were discussing. So there could be the due diligence. The due diligence is itself a huge exercise. Due diligence requires an exercise on the financial side, the legal side, the business side, the procedural side, when the company was formed, whether the whole audit trail, the document trail is available when the company was formed, the agreements, it could be very extensive. And many times it depends on the deal size. So if the deal size is too small, the DD is not bound to be very long for a long period, because then the investor knows what critical aspect he has to see. If the deal size is pretty big, then the DD ought to be big, ought to be very, very detailed. So to prevent anything going wrong during the DD, the starting point is when you started your company, you start with the proper documentation, proper procedures, proper compliance, proper governance. So things start from there, because when the DD happens, the DD's starting point is from the day the company is started. They talk about the conversion options available, the investors' rights and protections, the preventive rights, like mentioned, so they get mentioned, the voting rights, protective provisions. So if you see in the point number 21, you will see in this case, the board observer is being appointed, not a director. So what all actions will happen through the approval of board observer. So they get mentioned. So they're very specific. The term sheet gets specific to an extent that if this is not allowed by board observer, even if founders have the majority, they will not be able to do anything. Then talking about the board seat, so whether investor is interested in taking a board seat, having a nominee director, or going through the board observer, so that gets mentioned in the term sheet. The inspection rights, the information rights. 24th point talks about the business plan. So this is usually the business deck, the investment deck that you prepare, that convinces the investor that the money has to be invested in your company. So that becomes part of the term sheet agreement. Then the general clauses, and get to the end of the agreement. And this is one of they say is non-binding effect. So this is where it gets mentioned in the term sheet that this term sheet is a non-binding term sheet, and the conditions, if it changes, the deal can be called off. Now, talking about certain cautions that are required when the term sheet has been agreed upon, are finding these days happy days that the investment has come in. Now we'll have those growths that you have dreamt of. But there are certain cautions that get neglected at the time when these things are happening, or these things are promised to get happen. So what I'll just tell you what I'm talking about. So, and this is something that is very common these days, and you will find that there will be people, there will be investors, very small time investors, even the mentors, and even that to that case, even consultants also these days getting into this kind of a business model where they will tell you that we will take you to an extent where we'll make you ready for being funded well, where we'll take you to a level where we'll tell you how to run a company. So in lieu of their services, they take a stake in your company and also receive certain consulting services, the fees. This happens with the investors as well, where they kind of tell to the founders, to the company, that you have to use their space. So that why this becomes double whammy, because they are taking the stake also in the company, and they're also taking the value, these fees, the consideration from your company. So this way, the company gets ramped up twice, right? First from the equity point of view, and then from the operative point of view. So this is something if you can to a level where you can see if certain people have or will come and approach you. So you have to be cautious about the approach, that how much you need to give out. And the other thing to be cautioned about is the copy paste approach. Now, what copy paste approach is these days, because everything is available on Google's or the counter or your fellow startups who have already done this. So there's a tendency that we get to copy paste certain documents, certain procedures, certain, even to the extent the legal documents. Now, one thing we need to understand is that one size doesn't fit all. Now, your conditions in the term sheets, your business line in terms of whether both the companies are product companies, but there will not be an exact similarities in conducting your business. There will be some sort of differentiation that will definitely come, and the documentation will have to be changed to that extent. So please, that's an approach that you must not be taking into consideration. All term sheets and agreements, even though they may look the same, but the evil is always in the writing. That what is understood by between the investor and the founder will not be same what the other investors or the founders have agreed to. One of the very critical ones, and you may agree or may not agree to this, but the transparency is one of the very, very important things that you must be having with your investor. So many startups tend to, and this is something that I've experienced myself, they tend to hide things because they have not done it well, or they have not done it correctly, and for the want of getting the money, because their product is so attractive, the investors are kind of sideline this, but they can this is something it explodes later on. If the later DDs explode this, then neither the investor will have the good face, or not you will have the trust face. You will lose that trust. So building that trust right from the beginning, at the time of when you are negotiating, you can come out with your certain incompleteness, incorrectness. There's no harm in coming out with and telling them, okay, this is something that has happened wrong with us. Even if you go to the investor, if you want to do some limited DD at your own expense, you must do it, so that you know that on a critical phase, when the money is needed and the DD says no, when the investor DD says no, you will not be in that position to then go and search for the new one. So it's always better to have a transparent approach with your investor, and the investor definitely understand that you're not from a business background. Your background could be technical, and your business knowledge might not be that sound. So he might come handy in correcting things. So you must have that kind of a trusting approach with him. The key takeaways that we have from this session is that must be aware of the dilution that you are giving out. It might start with 20%, 25%, 30%. So what dilution you are agreeing to, because your first term sheet, what the thing that you have to understand and be clear about is the first term sheet lays down the foundation, the roadmap for the future investments. If your first term sheet restricts you to have certain lucrative investments coming at a later stage, then forget the future investment coming in, because the roadmap gets set in from the first term sheet, and the future investors will definitely be seeking that what you agreed upon in the initial phase of your startup should not trouble them at the later stage. The terms of investments, whether they are practical enough for you to be taking his investment or the investor coming to you, the restrictions on further funding, like I just said, that the term should not be dilutive enough to restrain or restrict the future investment to come in. Now, are the investors in for a long haul or a short haul? This is something, because a moment ago we mentioned about the redemption clause. So if the investor is there for a shorter clause, be ready to burn more money from your pocket for him to get out at the time when he has stipulated to. Are the terms clear and the future proof? So this is something you can know if you are being advised properly by your legal guy, your consultant, or whosoever you hired, or the mentor. You need to see that how the roadmap fits in, whether the idea of the culture getting coexist. This is something when it comes to the governance part. Usually you see when the startups start their business, they are very low on governance because they really don't know how much to do. Your accountant is not expected to be aware of all the compliance laws or the tax laws, because he is just an accountant. If you have someone as a mentor on your board with a technical know-how, and here I'm taking a specific example of compliance or governance, then the investor, when he comes in, he might come in with a strong governance background, thinking that your company. So at that time, if you are not trained enough, or you're not having that kind of a culture within your own entity of having meetings at the stipulated times, having the notes been minuted in a written form, there could be many ways. So the cultures have to coexist. Now, whether your investor and you can coexist together, because this is the time when you will be tiding along. It could become very frustrating for the founders because they have not been trained to do certain work in a certain way. So this will be a hard time for them to get trained now. And of course, the investment has to be a win-win situation for both the parties. So what we tend to tell at the raise the capital what is needed. So you don't take a capital what is not needed. So if your need is low, don't go for high, because that could be something that you can save upon. Your investment will grow. Your investment at a later time will give you better returns. So don't go for something that can come in easily. So this is one approach that the investors definitely take on. They try to lure you with more investment with more stake in it. Your approach should be, because this is how you can retain your upside, by having maximum investment with the minimum stake, because that is how you can protect yourself. You can retain your upside by having the right kind of board compositions, the agreements, the conditions that you agree on. So you have to keep a control intact in that way. Otherwise, it will be very frustrating for you to run a business. Even taking a approval for a simple, assigning an agreement with a customer, a particular region, a particular market region, will be difficult if the control aspect has not been taken very seriously and not been thought that very well. And definitely limit your downside risk, that you should not get into a trap where all the control is with the investor, and later on after 6 months you realize that I just had money and I don't have a control over the money, over the company anymore. That ends the session, and I'm open to the Q&A. So Manish, you can take over now.
Yeah, Jasmeet sir, I think it was a very informative session. It was a very engrossing session. Thanks to you. Thanks for sharing all the information with us so frankly and in such a brief manner. I think we have had quite a long session, so we thoroughly enjoyed
I didn't realize that actually.
Yeah. So I think we can close the session now. So if any participants have any questions, they can write to us, and then we will take those questions later on.
Of course.